It's Tuesday. You already know what time it is. It's R3's time, where we read. I'm Naila. I'm your CEO and your founder of R3, Real Eyes, Real Lives, Real Lives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. And what better way to do that than to read, write, and understand or overstand for your own comprehension and level. So, of course, we're jumping right into it. We are now reading the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina, Coup D'Etat by David B. McCoy. This book is actually very excellent since there is a lot of news going on in Florida and North Carolina with the hurricanes hitting in those areas. So we're able to actually connect the dots geography-wise and see what's going on back in the 1800s. So if you didn't know, the Wilmington, North Carolina, like we discussed last week, was another Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was another Seneca Village in New York. It was another Black Wall Street that was taken down and tore down. It was a successful and booming town of some prominent Black people who own businesses, who own shops, who own nonprofit organizations to help the community and build themselves up. But in 1898, a coup d'etat took over where whites seized the town of Wilmington, North Carolina. So we're going to be jumping right into it. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our hostess with the mostest. She's going to let you know a little bit more and some of the logistics, and I'll be back.
Hey, y'all. Hello. It's Havaso here, hostess of the mostest. We're here for our book club, which is weekly, every Tuesdays. It's at 3 times 2 now. 3 times 2, which is 6 o'clock. We are reading, like she said, the 1898 Wilmington, Delaware Coup d'Etat.
North Carolina.
Coup d'Etat. Huh?
North Carolina. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, North Carolina. Well, it probably happened everywhere. But we're reading about the one in North Carolina. And like I said, we're here every Tuesday at 3. You can get us at R3 Real Lives, and that will take you to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and to YouTube and the website. And if you on all of those platforms, you are welcome to like, share, and follow for free. If you would be so kind to donate $1 or add as many zeros to that dollar as you want to, you can do that on our website. We have a few campaigns. One specifically is a scholarship. And then we also have smaller campaigns where we do drive-by homeless shelter, feeding, clothing, and clothing drives. But if you have another campaign that you want us to get a part of, and we can make a new campaign and we can do that too. Again, this book is very interesting. Specifically, during this election, we felt it was very important to read what has happened in history and what we know has happened in our current history with the attempted takeover of our government because Donald Trump was not reelected and his fan base chose to go crazy and storm the Capitol. And, for 30 minutes of their lives, these people have only experienced adversity in their mind. And because of that adversity and what they felt like was wrongdoing, they stormed the Capitol and, even bringing a Confederate flag into the United States Capitol, which the Confederates never even done. But you would think it would be Black and brown people who would be storming the Capitol because of the hundreds of years of diversity, exclusion, not diversity, exclusion that we have endured over the years, yet we still stand strong and tall and try to be dignified in our fight, which sometimes, the tip of the sword might need to be sharpened, but I digress. Anyway, these people willfully just came and destroyed a duly elected cabinet that was complete with men. There was no women, of course, back then, with Black men and white men who were fine working together. They were overthrown and just taken over and slaughtered. And we will never know the amount of people that died because, as we know, we cannot trust the history books. We cannot trust the account that the government, that the white racist government officials put in the newspaper. If they said it was 7 dead Black men, it probably was 107. So it's up to us to do the research and the me-search so that you can find out what happened in the history to prevent it in the past. To prevent it in the future. But again, I'm going to put it back to you, Kid. We got a series of slides we're going to go over. And please comment, like, share, and follow. Again, at R3, every Tuesdays at 3 times 6 right now. And, 3 times 2, which is 6. Every Tuesdays at 6. At R3, we'll get you to all of our links. Back to you, kid.
All right, and we're back. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at R3 Real Eyes. So I'll just give you a quick overview, which is here on the book. So I don't have the book in paper, but I do have it on the Nook. So that is what the book actually looks like. That is the cover of the book, and that's an article. So last week we actually spoke about political propaganda and how political cartoons overall, were actually created to promote political agendas. So similar to what she was referring to as a certain president not being elected and his body of people pushing out certain agendas with their rhetoric. Now we call political cartoons propaganda in the form of social media posts, in the form of rants and raves on Twitter, Facebook, things like that, or misinformation, and as well as a little bit of disinformation in order to sway the people to their sides. So again, to touch on a few things, there was two political parties then as we have them now, even though there's multiple parties, but the two majority parties here in the United States will be Republicans and Democrats. So if you just flip those into the 1800s, you will get the Republicans, who were formed with the body of Negroes, aka the Black African American people, and then also formed with those people were formed with some of the local people, the farmers, some of the people who actually wanted, in a way, to have freedom and move on with life. Then you had the Democrats, who were all gung-ho for keeping slavery and keeping the black man down by any means necessary. So in this book, the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina, Coup D'Etat by David B. McCoy, we kind of will be discussing overall just what happened that led up to this Coup D'Etat, and also about what was being taken place in some of the names. So also in the political parties, you will hear about names of the Fusionist Party, which is where whites and the Republican parties joined together and created their Fusionist Party. Then we'll also be hearing about the Scallywags. We'll be hearing about different names, so keep that in the back of your mind as well. So a quick overview here. We're just going to read the top of, I like what it has here, so we'll read it. It says, the Constitution and laws are not always right. They are often unendurable. When that is so and no other redress is possible, men appeal to another right as a sacred as any other human right, the right of revolution. If they fail to take the consequences, if they succeed, they are not rebels or revolutionists, but the principles they establish by force become thereby constitutional rights and are such before the act of formulation. And this is from the Brooklyn Citizen, November 12th, 1989. So although that is an overview, let's go back here. It also is beginning of chapter 1 that we read about. That is the beginning of chapter 1. A lot of people like to hear revolutionaries, of which I am a revolutionary. If you didn't know, I'm the Sticky Icky Truth, here to bring it to you. Also the founder of the nonprofit organization R3. But a revolutionist is someone who sees that the rights of the people, or the human rights of the people, are being pushed against. So they're doing something revolutionary. They're doing something that has not been done. They're doing something opposite of the status quo. A lot of times people who are against freedom for all, people who are against progressive movements, will call that something as treachery or something that goes against the Constitution, something that's not for the people. But that's not exactly so. And so we'll learn about that in the 1800s especially. So I like how it starts off with the introduction explaining that the Constitution and laws are not always right. And when you go against them, sometimes you're put in another box. So we're just going to start reading just briefly from the introduction. Following that sentence, it says, such a statement would have been widely embraced by most citizens of southern states prior to and during the Civil War. What is remarkable, though, is that those sentiments were still held by white supremacists 34 years after the war as a justification for staging of the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina Coup D'Etat. If a subversive body attempted to undermine the agreed upon form of government and replace it with a dictatorship or fascism, such sentiments would be justified. However, if this case of the Wilmington coup, the abuses of power were trumped up lies and racial at heart, and you notice I put trumped up lies, okay? I wanted to emphasize that. Trumped up lies and racial at heart. What is more, the redresses white supremacists wanted were to deny recently emancipated African Americans the right to vote and to force them back into an albeit legal state of servitude. And so what I was speaking about earlier actually on the phone is that we've never actually left that state of servitude. Now we actually incorporated all people, all groups of racial bodies into that, and we call it the melting pot, the American dream. But if you think about what was people doing before slavery, they weren't serving enough another person's cause if that would be the case, right? So we have to think about that always and keep that in the back of our head. So chapter 1, we're going to point out some quotes before we get over to the slides, but you should have read chapter 1, and it speaks a lot about Abraham Lincoln, what he was pushing for. Although I like to make a statement, Abraham Lincoln did not free the slaves, but he did write in certain laws that helped to free them, because he did say, as my grandpa will quote, that Abraham Lincoln said that if he could save the Union without freeing the slaves, he would do so. So therefore, he's not one to put on a high pedestal as freeing the slaves, but he is one that took some action before he was assassinated. So it speaks about Abraham Lincoln in the beginning, and I'll give you guys that quote later. I actually tag it on this video so you will get the full quote of Abraham Lincoln and what I'm referring to. So then we'll get on to the radical Republicans is what they were called at this time. And remember, the radical Republicans were considered a group of African Americans, freed African Americans that were exercising their political freedom and their political rights at this time, right? And then you had the Democrats, who were majorly the racists. So if you skip over to page, it doesn't tell me the page numbers, does it? Page 3, I highlighted here that it says Johnson like Lincoln. So remember, President Johnson actually took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, right? So it says Johnson like Lincoln held that the southern states had never legally left the Union and retained most of Lincoln's 10% plan. Once 10% of the voting population in any state had taken the oath, a state government could be put in place and the state could be reintegrated into the Union. So remember what I said about it was just all about saving the Union. It was not necessarily about giving people their freedom, giving people their rights, because Abraham Lincoln, like I said before, said that if he could save the Union without freeing the slaves, he would do so. Therefore, we don't want to put too much pride and justice on a president who basically wouldn't do what they said he did in the history books. But remember, history books are written by the people who went against us in the first place. So then if you go over to page 4, I highlighted here, so this is what the laws did. It pardoned those who had rebelled against the national government, except the most high-ranking political and military leaders, and the men of considerable wealth. It specified an oath to be taken by those who wanted to be pardoned, and it allowed Southerners to keep all their property except former slaves. So just think about in context, geography-wise, what's happening in the southern states now with them banning books, them banning abortion, them banning a lot of things that should be a human right and a personal choice and right as well. So you just got to keep that in mind when political issues are arising. A lot of these groups of people will push, like I talked about, political cartoons or the political propaganda to push someone to their side, when most of these are just a human right. That's why in America you have that written in the Declaration of Independence, that we are all guaranteed the right of the pursuit of happiness, right? Think about that term in the Declaration, the pursuit of happiness, okay? So, can everybody hear me? You said you can't hear me. Let me see here. Can everybody hear? It might be your phone. Not you. On Instagram. Let me know if everyone can hear. Okay, so maybe come out and come back in. Okay, so on page 4, I highlighted here, if the state did not have to repay those who had lent the state money, many individuals will lose their fortunes and banks I don't know why that's calling me. Many people will go bankrupt. So when they're fighting over this 1865 convention, it was to revoke the 1861 ordinances of succession, to abolish slavery, ratify the 13th Amendment, and cancel all state debt that was created in carrying out the war effort. While the first 3 items were readily agreed upon, the subject of the state debt caused great concern. So I just wanted to go back really quick and just state that, because that is the issue now that we always see. It's always blame on the state debt. It's blamed on the federal debt, why they can't pass certain laws, why certain presidents, whether you're Democrat or Republican, because we have 2 presidents now, they always refer back to debt as if the debt is the issue of the people. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should always be at the top of the cause, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and any political agenda that either president candidate has. It shouldn't be the debt. The debt is up to the states who created it to figure it out. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to point that out on page 4. So they said if the state did not have to repay those who had lent the state money, many individuals will lose their fortune and banks will go bankrupt. I say bankrupt the banks anyway because economy came from controlling the people in the first place. So if you had self-sustainability, the right to self-determination, then we wouldn't have to worry about banks corrupting each other because we'll be on a barter system and everybody would be able to do what they specialize in and we'd be able to trade and barter with one another. Therefore, you would not necessarily need an economy. You would need a thriving civilization, a thriving nation that could actually sustain themselves, not have to import things, not have to export things. We'll be able to sustain ourselves on the land. And that goes back into, redlining, all of the lands being taken up by the city, state, or the county, and not allowing people to cultivate on their own. So just keep that in mind. On page 4, I highlighted here, about 350,000 slaves in the state have been freed by the 13th Amendment. That left a series of puzzling questions. Should the freedmen be allowed to vote? So this was the issue the entire time. Would the freedmen be allowed to vote? The freedmen would be the freed Negroes or the African Americans, right? Don't feel too kindly when I use that word interchangeably. Know thyself above anything else, right? But that was their main concern. Should they be allowed to vote? So this is where also political parties and political agendas, neither person was ever really necessarily for the black African American to be free, but each party needed us in order to help push their agenda. Just keep that in mind as well as you're reading and continuing on. So I wanted to highlight, you should already know about that, but the black codes. Black codes was something that was established in order to keep us down. We hear it a lot, like no loitering. When you see no loitering outside of liquor stores and certain stores at the time, that was actually created for black people. It wasn't created for all. Remember, we were all put in this melting pot now in order to justify slavery or servitude and to keep the black man down. But those black codes were created for the recently freed men. No loitering. Don't stand outside my property. Things like that. So we're going to read just a little bit. So it says here, these black codes, this is on page 4 from if you're reading off the Nook. These black codes denied freedmen the right to vote, serve on juries, and testify against whites in courts, established capital punishment for blacks convicted of raping white women, prohibited blacks from owning or carrying firearms or other weapons unless they obtained a license 1 year before the purchase, and outlaw interracial marriages. A lot of those topics you'll actually hear come up every election that happens, especially the presidential elections. So if you think about the right to serve on juries, they allow us to serve on juries now, but if you think about the right to be tried by a member of your own peers, right? How many times are black people actually tried by members of their own peers or just in their own zip code? If you think about that in aspects where a lot of white people get off for certain crimes and murders that happen to black men we all seen it on the news now. We shouldn't have to mention it. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, these type of names come up and then they say that these people were tried by a jury of their own peers, their white peers. But when it comes to a black individual, usually we have a mixed body of people. Why? Because it goes back to these black codes, right? So then also the black codes denied freedmen the right to vote. My mom always brings this up about the Voting Rights Act expiring every 15 years. That was also created to keep freedmen down, not necessarily to push the white people back or anything like that. It was to keep us in check so that they can make amendments at any time they felt necessary. So these laws have never left. They're just called by a new name. Then also I want to point out established capital punishment for blacks convicted of graping. We should actually say white women. And if you're on social media, they also ban pages for saying a word that was historical, right? That things happen. So that keep in mind. We just had a gentleman, I forget his name. If you have his name, please say it out loud or put it in the chat. He was actually given the death penalty. And there's harsher punishments for those who are black. And then also I want to point out one is the carrying firearms or other weapons unless obtain a license 1 year before the purchase. Now, a lot of people talk about the NRA and all of the things like that, but we do have the right to bear arms. Now, I'm not going to justify or go on any side because this isn't a political talk, but this is an educational talk. But if you think about the right to bear arms, it was one group of people trying to bear arms to keep the black people people down, and then it was the African Americans, the black people, trying to bear arms to protect themselves from the people who were trying to keep them down. So when you're always hearing these talks, think about both sides. So then also lastly, it was like they also outlawed interracial marriages. At this time, we're more progressive in 2024, but if you think about interracial marriages and what it happens and what happens now, it's not really changed anything. If anything, it's made us more confused on what we are to do and a goal as a people of the African diaspora, which is total freedom, not necessarily integrate, but being separate but equal. And that was another law that was introduced with the Brown versus Board of Education, but we'll talk about that a different day. So then a few laws that we still have today that were created in 1866 were the Freedmen's Bureau Act of 1866, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and the 14th Amendment. So you'll always hear people refer to that as well. Okay, so then we're going to get into the party's explanation a little bit. Where am I on time? Okay, the party's explanations a little bit. So on page 6, it refers to the conservatives. So the conservatives would later become known as Democrats. Its members wanted the state to be more like it and had been before the war, and not have Negro equality forced on them. It also says the Party for Congressional Reconstruction and Negro Emancipation called itself the Republican Party. I've already explained that to you, but that's where you can find it in the book. So continuing on, the whites in the party came from two groups. The Scallywags, if you haven't heard that name, who were from the state and became Republicans. Remember, Republicans were against slavery at this time and Democrats were for. So they became Republicans. And the Carpetbaggers were Northerners who came south in part for private gain, but also to aid in congressional reconstruction. So the task of educating blacks to the Republican Party's ideology was primarily carried out by the secret society known as the Union League. So you'll read about the Union League a little bit, and we'll go into detail with that probably next week. And then speaking of Civil War, you always hear about the Civil War, but we don't get too much into numbers like our hostess with the Moses stated a lot. And these numbers are interchangeable, just like those of the transatlantic slavery that happened. The numbers are interchangeable because they weren't too busy counting who and what was happening. I'm just muting you. I'm keep getting a little distracted by the radio. Okay. And then on page 7, it says the Civil War had brought great damage to North Carolina. Over 40,000 men were killed. Both state and local governments collapsed, and the main source of labor disappeared. When the slaves gained their freedom, and many colleges closed, factories shut down, and banks collapsed. So again, you're hearing the wealth that technically we did not have at the time was collapsing around them due to the Civil War breaking out, which is why Abraham Lincoln was so dead set on making sure he could save the Union regardless if the slaves were free or not, right? It's all about money, capitalism. And then where the Klan sprung up. So everybody hears the name KKK. So they're getting introduced in 1867, and you can find that on page, what page is this? We're on now 7. So it just says, read it. Make sure you're reading with this R3, the Real Book Club. But I'll read here. It says the Klan had sprung up in Tennessee just after the war and spread to North Carolina by late 1867. And a little bit further down, it says to ensure that the Negro was kept down, not in slavery, of course, but in a low social position. And if you look at it now, I know a lot of time we like to think of the African Americans progressing because we have billionaires and millionaires and we got nice houses and fancy cars. But overall, as a group, we are still held down in a low social position, right? We have to climb the ranks. And when you do climb those ranks, then you're considered separate from your group and your class because you're an anomaly, right? So we have to think about that, keeping the Negro down, and hasn't changed. It's just been oversaturated. So now we think that a few blacks having a little bit of wealth means that we're all succeeding, and it's not necessarily true. There's still work to do, which is why we're here and we're reading, right? So lastly, I'm going to end here, and hopefully we have time to get over to the slides really quick. But there was a good quote that pointed out by Richard L. Zubbard on the last page of the chapter 1. He was a historian, and he wrote, even if the Republicans had given the state good government, had not raised taxes, and had not been involved in corruption, the conservatives would have been bitterly opposed to them because some of them were black, some were not properly educated, and some were from outside the state. To put it another way, the enemies of the Negroes, scallywags, and the carpetbaggers opposed them, not so much because they governed badly, but because they were in the positions of power which the old Whigs and Democrats had divided between themselves. At any rate, the conservatives were determined to put the Negro back in his place, chase out the carpetbaggers, and remove from power the scallywag, William Holden and his friends. So that is just a brief summary of chapter 1. Make sure you guys read next week, chapter 2. So we're going to see if we got time to head over to our slides really quick. I didn't pull it up, so let's do this quickly. Let's see here. Just pull up our slides. It's in my Gmail. And hopefully we can get up to number 20, I believe we should be doing. So let's see here. And remember, our slides also show us a little bit of the political cartoons that were being used as well. What is this page doing? I have no idea. Let's see. Okay. So give me a second. We are bringing them up. You know, when you try to do things on the computer, it takes forever. At least my computer does. Did you want to add anything in while I'm pulling this up?
No, it's important just to know the history of what we're fighting for in the country, and if you want to live in a world where your eyes are covered, then you can't complain. You got to vote. That's the most important thing.
Right. Exactly.
And be involved, even if it's just a reading book club where you're trying to gain knowledge yourself through activism and education.
Exactly. Where did you send the slides last time? Let me type in this.
On email.
I know, but I'm like, where? I got all your business on here. I'm looking for.
I'm just going to resend it to you.
Okay, which email?
To the one I always send it to.
Icky or my regular one?
Your regular one.
Okay. Maybe that's why I'm in the wrong one.
Oh, no, this one going to LA Film. Let me go there.
I'm not logged in on
there
that.
There we go. Okay.
1 second, guys. So I'm just going to pull up a few of our slides. And I'll probably re-show you guys if we don't have time because our timer will be going off. I will show you guys just the political cartoons at least again, just to put that back in your head. Remember, propaganda then is now considered social media post, rants, raves in order to sway certain parties to their sides. That's what it's used for now. Okay, I got the 10-minute marker. So where is it? What is happening? Okay, you gonna mute yourself a little? Oh, okay. This is ridiculous. I hope you see my computer. You see why I can't do anything? It takes forever. Okay, so maybe I can't find it today. Oh, here we go. Okay, she sent it again. There we go. Sorry, guys, my computer takes forever. Do y'all think voting is more beneficial to the politicians? And now, voting is beneficial, so you always have something to say. That's if you don't vote, you deserve whatever you get. If you do vote, you deserve what you intended when you put your vote in. If those people don't deliver as they promised, that is not a problem of your vote. That is a problem of the integrity of the system and the integrity of the political candidates that said they're here to protect the human rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of the people. And if the people voted a certain way, then that would make them responsible.
And it's important to vote, especially in your local and state governments.
Yeah.
Because,
So,
we tend to go and only vote at the top. We're voting for president. Well, essentially, the president has limited powers without Congress and the Senate. So if we're not voting for the correct officials and the lower levels, our cities, we can't get anything done. And the state who's sending people to where you represent us. So you have to vote for these lower levels so we can make change. And if they know, especially the Congress, I believe they are reelected every 2 years. If they know they're not performing the way we want them to perform, we vote them out. And they are the ones who have power, So I think all of us could do with taking a civics class. I was thinking about retaking civics because it's all out of my memory so that we can learn how this government works and not just walk blindly through the night.
Right. Can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay. So we're just going to start on this slide where slide 14 we were actually on, because we went over, this is some of the political cartoons that they had. Of course, this is the Negro stumping the white man, right? When is this ever actually happening? When have we ever actually had that power over white people? It's not true, but this is a political cartoon. This is a political agenda that was created in order to push their propaganda and the things that they wanted to see being done, right? So what is happening? Leave. Okay. So this is a political cartoon. Okay. And so this here is just the red shirts from Laurinburg, North Carolina. And again, the red shirts were a group of Democratic Party members whose goal was to intimidate black citizens from voting in the 1898 elections. I love seeing pictures like this because with facial recognition now, I just wish that we could pull these pictures up. I mean, they may not be alive, but their genealogy
I can't see what you're looking at.
is
It's still
there.
Stuck on the Gmail.
Okay, I asked you if you could see it, so let's see.
I can't. I mean, I could see a screen, but I didn't know what you was talking about.
Can you see it now?
It's starting. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, continue.
Okay, we only have 6 minutes left, so let's just kind of scope through here. All right, so again, I mentioned propaganda and intimidation. So newspaper stories and public speeches of white supremacists were used to create fear of blacks and white citizens. With the support of the racial editor of the News and Observer at the time, Josephus Daniels, who continually supported and printed such propaganda, white citizens were convinced that black equality would mean the end of society as they knew it. So just think about the picture we just seen and the propaganda that they were pushing at, claiming that it would be the end of white society. Similar to now when they were shouting blood and soil, when they had the insurrection at the Capitol, they used it all to justify the fact that they feel that we are going to be taking over, right? And if you even look here, it says white society was cautioned of the black beast who would harm white women and white society if it's not stopped, right? So think about that like the Beauty and the Beast, or a big man, trying to wipe down white women. This is what it was all about, right? So let's go over to, we'll read some of this. So propaganda and intimidation, Alex Manley and the Willmington Record. So Alex Manley was the black editor of the Willmington Record, the city's only African-American newspaper at the time. In August 1898, Manley printed an editorial in response to a speech given by a Georgia woman that the white-owned paper in Wilmington had published. In the racist speech, the white women supported the lynching of black men who had inappropriate relationships with white women. She cautioned white men to protect white women from such behavior. Manley was rightfully infuriated by the speech. In his editorial response, he argued that it was white males who were guilty for abusing black females. He also noted that the white women might enjoy the company of a black man. Until to this day, they still do, right? It becomes actually, in a way, a sort of fetish. The exchange of words between the two newspapers increased racial tensions. Alfred Moore Waddell used these tensions to the Democratic Party's advantage, calling for the removal of the Republicans and the populists in power. He proposed in a speech that the white citizens, if necessary, should choke the Cape Fear with carcasses. Manley was run out of the city after the November election, avoided lynching. He lived the remainder of his life in the northern states. So if you wonder how most of us got to to California and these northern states, a lot of it was fleeing persecution, lynching, murder, harassment in those southern states where slavery was prominent at. So just think about that and keep that. That was a picture. I just gave you a close-up of Alex Manley. That is who he was. Strong man, standing up for what he believed in regardless. So then we'll just end here. We have like 3 minutes. So it says, the day before the election, Democrats held a rally at Thalian Hall in which Alfred Moore Waddle gave a speech that demonstrated his party's determination. You are Anglo-Saxons. You are armed and prepared, and you will do your duty. Be ready at a moment's notice. Go to the polls, and if you find the Negro out voting, tell him to leave the polls. And if he refuses, kill him, shoot him down in his tracks. We shall win tomorrow, and if we have to do it with guns, we shall win tomorrow if we have to do it with guns. And that was Alfred Moore Waddle and November 7th, 1898. And just put that in perspective, how now they're trying to prevent people from mailing in their ballots and going to the polls. But a lot of these people were actually denied the rights of voting and were intimidated and harassed even in the 2022 election, right? This was a big issue. Also, not being able to give water to people waiting in these states. And it was very hot outside. And that was a big issue if you were keeping up with the political election that happened to put, your favorite person into office. And also when he was rerunning with Joe Biden. Okay, so this was an issue, and they were all trying to do certain things to prevent the Negro, the African American in the southern states from voting, period, point blank. This was it was about, and this is what it's still about to this day. So on election day, and we'll actually end here, it says African American voters brave in the face of hatred and intimidation and still turned out in large numbers for the election of 1898. However, the number of Republicans and populists was less than the extremely large number of Democratic voters who turned out. The Democrats who favored white supremacy were also reported to stuff the ballot boxes. So we'll just end there. Remember, we are R3. We're eyes, we're lives, we're lives, where we promote knowledge itself through education and activism. What better way to do that than to read, write, and overstand for your own understanding and make sure that you know what happened in history so it doesn't repeat itself. The stuffing of ballot boxes, the preventing of people being able to vote by mail in person, intimidation at the election, at the polls is still happening to this day. So it's very important that we know the story of the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina Coup D'Etat, where the whites seized the town from the African Americans, from the Negroes, and they started a Coup D'Etat. And I'm Naila, I'm your CEO and your founder. You have Hostess with the Moses. I'm going to pass it over to her. She has 1 minute to close us out. See you next week. Read chapter 2.
It's Howard Soul, the hostess with the Moses, coming at you. We got 1 minute. You get us at R3 Realize, at R3 Realize, where you get us Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and to the website. I must have missed one, but I don't know. We're reading about the 1898 Coup D'Etat in Wilmington, North Carolina, which we've seen a recent view of what happened, except for there were many people who died and were removed. They were unsuccessful recently, but in 1898 it's happened. United States, we have had this happen before, and if you do not read about it, know about it, learn about it, you're doomed to repeat yourself. And we got awfully close a couple of years ago to repeating that history. So 1898, Wilmington, read about it with us, for us, share it, ask us questions at R3 Realize, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and the website and YouTube. Back to you, kid.
All right. We will see you next week. We are R3. Use your real eyes and read. We have now been reading the book by David B. McCoy, the 1898 Coup D'Etat of Wilmington, North Carolina. Peace. Or we say 3.